success. Success huge and global, but it's also happens in tiny little increments. And I think the trick is to appreciate, to have the appreciation and have the ability to see the success on the micro level, right? I think
Yes, this
that's
is
maybe the definition of happy.
yes,
The
yes.
examples that I
Yeah.
gave are nominal and small, but I think that as a philosophy of life, I would think that the different that people, have a happy disposition are people who appreciate, serve, they put it on the table, a beautiful meal, or they cook something that was successful and their spouse or their child puts the food in their mouth and says, wow, this is amazing. That's a huge success, and taking solace and joy from all.
Yes, I think this is the most eloquent and complex answer that I've ever received to this question. Hello,
Hello.
welcome back. I'm Andrea Parc,
And I'm Alexa Dumitru.
and this is Alive Again, is a podcast where attorneys and other professionals share life stories of universal challenges that shaped their journeys. Today is the first episode of this new year, and with us today, we have a great friend, attorney, mother, wife, a person that I truly respect, Svetlana Schreiber. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure and my honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So let me explain a little bit why I admire and I respect you so highly. So I know you for probably more than 20 years, right? We met through a common friend. And to me, what you're doing as an attorney and as a human being is amazing. You have an amazing practice, law practice. You also are a mother to two great men who are my age. You're married, and you also have time for other amazing things like a book club or hiking or going to the theater or a movie. So let me start by asking you, why law?
Excellent question. Why law? So I came to the law quite accidentally. I was actually heading my ambitions as a young child and all through college was to become a doctor. And in fact, I did a pre-med major and took organic chemistry and suffered through all the slings and arrows of a pre-med program, and in fact also sat for the MedCats in an effort to get into medical school. But somewhere in my college education, I came across my favorite subject, which is, and ended up with a double major in comparative literature. And in fact, instead of heading to medical school, headed into a PhD program in comparative literature. Literature by far has been the big love of my life, and which explains my involvement in book clubs and my passion for books, and probably attached to that my love of all the arts and theater, dance, music. I was a single mom with a toddler, and I was PhD program in comparative literature, headed to an academic career, and realized that that it was going to be almost impossible to properly support my young child, given my expectations to send him to private schools and wanting him to, of course, have the best education possible. And knowing, especially at the time, how low the academic salaries were, but also how competitive and difficult it was for me to aspire to an academic career, that even if I were to finish my PhD program, that there were so few openings in the competitions extraordinary that my chances of landing an academic post would be very slim. And considering other career paths seemed sensible at the time. So I met a young law student, and in my conversation with her about law school, I was suddenly inspired to consider law as an option, and it seemed like a logical nexus to literature, because in literature, in this program in comparative literature, what I was dealing with primarily was the use of language. Law was the use of language. I talk, I'm loquacious, I love using words to achieve my ends, and so it seemed like a natural connection. And I took the LSATs and did adequately well, applied to law school, was accepted, and I made it through law school. I should add, but by the time I sat for the bar exam, I had wondered. It was an extremely difficult and arduous journey, as you know, because you've gone through it yourself, especially sitting through the bar exam. Having come out at the other end and survived all those challenges, I have to say that I was extremely fortunate to make this choice, because I've loved being able to practice law, especially the kind of law that I was fortunate enough to practice. So for the last 25 years or so, which is, the better half of my career, I've focused in the area of immigration law. And immigration law, as you know, is an area where you're making a huge difference in people's lives. And I think this brings me back to my aspirations to be a doctor. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help people, and I wanted to save people and people's lives. And the law has given me that very license. It's really a privilege to have this incredible responsibility thrust upon me. And I feel very honored to be able to do this.
So I understand that it was meant to be an attorney, not a doctor.
At this point in my life, it certainly seems that way.
Yes. And because we all have a different understanding of what success means. What does success means to you?
I think success is a very complicated and multifaceted event, and it probably occurs numerous times and changes from moment to moment because it's situational, correct? So there is sort of the global question, oh, so and so is so successful, he's achieved the pinnacle of his career. So and so has argued in the US Supreme Court, so that's considered success. So and so has published a book which is getting rave reviews, and that's successful. So and so has been awarded a Tony or Globe or an Oscar, and those are success. But then there is the smaller successes, that we measure in our daily lives. The fact that your children have grown and are thriving and have survived. First of all, that's a critical thing. Getting your child through that first 18 years. And then of course having them become, achieve some kind of a career or a profession or finish university, and having gotten your children through those stages, and then being able to sort of, kick them out of the nest and have them have a head start and some kind of a decent start, and seeing them thrive and seeing them happy in their lives as adults. That's success also. And then bring it on a smaller, being it to a more immediate scale. Success is, winning a particular case or succeed solving a particular problem that results in a person who is going to be able, in my case, as doing immigration work, stopping somebody's deportation and having them, remain here, handing someone their green card, or watching one of your clients take a citizenship, or those are successes as well. And so, yes, all of, and then other levels of success, mentoring someone and encouraging them to become lawyers, and then urging them to go to law school or to take the bar exam, and then watching them succeed and attending their oath ceremony when they take their oath. That's also success. Or writing letters of reference to friends who are applying to law school and or to graduate programs, and hopefully your letters make a little bit of a difference, helps move the, moves this rock a little bit further, and that's also success. Huge and global, but it's also happens in tiny little increments. And I think the trick is to appreciate, to have the appreciation and have the ability to see the success on the micro level, right? I think
Yes, this is
that's maybe the definition of happiness.
yes.
The examples that I gave are nominal and small, but I think that as a philosophy of life, I would think that the different, that people, have a happy disposition are people who appreciate, serve, they put it on the table, a beautiful meal, or they cook something that was successful, and their spouse or their child, you know, puts the food in their mouth and says, wow, this is amazing. That's a huge success. And taking solace and joy from all.
Yes, I think this is the most eloquent and complex answer that I've ever received to this question. And I know that you have practiced law for over 40 years, right? At the beginning of your practice, have you set your mind on something that you want to do something in particular, or with your practice, or you just went with the flow?
Don't work in huge future plans. And certainly when I passed the bar exam and when I was finally sworn in, I was a single mother with two young, very, very young children living in the city without any family support and with almost no money. And I don't think that I had a great deal of time to be very philosophical. And add to that the fact that I was extremely young and had a huge joie de vivre and still did not plan on, sort of resigning myself to some kind of, sainted life of sacrificing myself to only work for my children. I wanted to also have fun and have life and see theater and do things, even though I had no money and no child care. So I had to figure it all out. So I would say that in those early years of my career, I was pretty much living from moment to moment and had to really just work to make enough money to get through basically the day, and then through the week, and then through the month, and then through the year. At the end of my first year in the law of my law practice, I took my children on a vacation because I squirreled up tiny little bit of money. I needed to spend time, more meaningful time with. And we visited my cousin who was an economist. And I I talked to him with some kind of wonderment about the miraculous thing of being a lawyer, because I had no assets. I didn't have anything other than my brain and my law license. And at the end of my first year, I had grossed $25,000, which seemed like an enormous amount of money, because during law school, I was employed as a full-time teacher for the Cleveland public school system, which is, by the way, how I supported us during my second year of law school. So I worked full time as a teacher, taught eighth grade, and I still continued full time as a law student. So did all my classes at night. But I was only paid $11,500 for that, for being a full time school teacher. And yet, when I finished my first year of practicing law, I had made $25,000. And this is, by the way, with no connections, with nothing other than my law license in my brain.
And this was what year?
Well, this is 1980, and my cousin said, and then my cousin said, said that, clearly he tagged me as successful. He said that that was a sign of success. And I was so baffled and continue to be baffled for years after, and even today, that this thing that really the wonderful thing about being a lawyer is that you don't need tools. You don't need an office. You just really need a good brain, and you need to be honest and ethical, and you need to give your clients zealous representation. Because if you get one client to believe in you, and they can only believe in you if you deliver, if you're honest, and if you're direct, and if you're probably modest, and that client will, so word of mouth will become your
Word of
best
mouth.
advertising.
It's the best
and so,
marketing, yes.
and so for years I would say that it's just so enigmatic that your brain alone is this phenomenal asset that as a lawyer is really all you need to succeed.
Yeah.
And you don't need all the other tools. Like you couldn't practice medicine with just your brain, because you need instruments, you need this, and you need labs, and like incredibly clean conditions, and so on and so forth. In the law, it's enough. Your license and your brain.
Yes, that's true. You can
You really
actually,
don't need them. In those
yeah.
days, of course, this was also pre-computers. You needed a typewriter,
That's exactly what I meant to say, that you needed just a pen to
a pen to write. In fact, I
a
had a
motion or a
typewriter, but
request.
I remember going into court and being served by other lawyers with handwritten pleadings, so which
Yeah.
was always a
The
little
brain and the
intense.
pen
Exactly.
to practice law. Yeah, yeah. As you know, a lot of our listeners are attorneys and young attorneys, some of them. And I would like to ask you if at the beginning of your practice you ever had what was your worst fear as a young practicing attorney?
Well, you mean what
If
things
you
made
had,
me nervous?
maybe you didn't have any fear, because these days a lot of lawyers and a lot of young lawyers are afraid of losing their license. They're afraid of doing something wrong or messing up with their IOLA accounts or losing a case. A lot of fears these days. And that's the reason why.
I think all those fears are real, and they're controlling, but they are controlling factors in a society as well. I mean, what makes you a decent citizen? A decent citizen is a person who generally, honors the law and follows the law. And what makes you a good neighbor is to be respectful and to be careful and not to trespass and not to take inappropriately from others. I think so. I love the fact that the profession itself, even though it has such a terrible reputation and people are always speaking ill of a lawyer, it's so undeserved, because I think the profession itself, it's so self um, regulating, and so, I mean, so controlling. And I think that, we are so that the ethical canons are very strictly enforced. And so the fear that lawyers have of you breaching some of the ethical rules, I mean, those are really the things that get lawyers into trouble, right? Is violating the rules that are set forth by the profession itself to control the profession. And so if you are going to lead a life that's generally ethical, and if you're going to be cautious and careful so that you don't miss statutes of limitations, I mean, so that you don't create malpractice, I mean, there is a reason to be afraid. I mean, we are guided. There are deadlines, and you can't miss deadlines, and you have to be careful, and you have to be cautious. So yes, but fear is a good thing, right? I mean, fear is what keeps you from making those mistakes, and keeps you on your toes. I mean, there is no free lunch, period. I mean, you have to concede and follow rules. You have to follow the rules of the profession. And so I mean, I've always been extremely creative in my approach to solving cases, but that doesn't mean that in this creativity that I took license, did anything, was inappropriate or in violation of the canon of ethics.
Yeah, this is a great answer.
By the way, I should say it's not easy. I didn't suggest that being a lawyer is easy, and having the right tools in place to check and double check, keeping lists, and obviously now there's a ton of computer programs out, that help you manage yourself. And obviously after 40 years, my practice is very different than it was at the beginning. It was much easier to practice law when I only had to control myself and be responsible for my work. But now, I have about 17 employees, and I'm responsible for everything that happens in my practicing law today is much more complex than it was when I started out. Not because the times have changed, because the same exact canons that regulated my practice 40 years ago still guide my practice today. But now I answer, and as I always say, I am now responsible for the mistakes of 17 people. And I take that to heart. I am fully responsible for any mistakes that they made. I don't pass the buck and I say, well, yes, of course, I'm disappointed and angry. But at the end, when I call the client, it's still my responsibility,
Yeah.
because it's my failure to oversee them or train them adequately or whatever it is that created the mistake to begin with. So yeah, I think that those are logical fears, and they're good fears. Fear is good.
Yeah. It
Fear
is.
is what keeps you towing the line.
Right. But it's also fear is the different how you handle fear is the difference between using it for moving forward or keeping you, yes, taking you behind and
Or
keeping you in,
paralyzing you. I mean,
yeah,
fear can be paralyzing. I mean, you
yes,
can end up
and a lot of
being like a
anxiety
deer
and
in.
depression and mental health. And it's exactly how you express it so well that when we know how to handle our right. So acknowledging and being aware of who we are and what we need to follow, I guess it's the best thing to consider in this practice. And I think you wanted to ask a
Yes,
question.
I have a question. So I know you're.
Wait,
Yes.
Alexandra, before you do, let me just address. I want to add something to what you said.
Mhm.
I think, yes, knowing how to address your fear, knowing how to handle it, but also knowing how to ask for help is critical. And so I really think that might be the crux here. Whether you're asking help from a friend or mentor, or when I started, my colleagues were very helpful, and I could always pick up the phone and say, how do I do this? I didn't have the benefit of working in the law office where I had a lot of mentors around me. But the community of lawyers around me was extremely generous and very supportive, and often answered my questions. So I want to add that asking for help is critical, whether it's asking for help, whether knowing that it's time to get a therapist and work out through some of the fears. Because if you are the sort of person who's paralyzed by fear, the last thing that you want is, after working so hard to become a lawyer, is to become so paralyzed by fear that you leave the profession, which would be a shame, because it's really a one thing to be able to do. So conquering your fear with the assistance of friends, colleagues, mentors, spouses, family, and ultimately, therapists is critical.
That's a great note.
So I know that your two adult sons are not in the law profession. What deterred them, or what made them choose otherwise?
Well, it wasn't what deterred them, but it was something that pulled them in other directions. They both were they're boys and they were young boys. I encouraged them to be active and pushed them academically, but ultimately what seduced them and stole their heart, theater. So both of them ended up in high school being very involved. Their high school had a very wonderful theater program and a great theater director, and the entire school was so behind the theater, and it was actually a wonderful experience for them. And although they were 4.5 years apart, and the other, they ended up both of them following a trajectory in theater, and they ended up going to conservatory. Both they're now professionally, as you both know. One is my son Mickey is at the moment the creative director for a company that does all the Broadway or a lot of the Broadway marketing, and before a with editor, and my younger son is a Broadway producer who has a few Tonys under his belt. So they're both really doing very well in the area that they both love. And I'm very happy about that. Having said that, I should tell you that I didn't push them to go to law school. I did encourage them to pursue their love, and I was completely supportive. But I gave them a deadline of the age of, so they were on the statute of limitations, which was the age of 30. I told them if by the age of 30 they were not successful in their respective careers, that then I expected them to go to law school or find a professional, more traditional career that would guarantee them a source of income. We didn't have a lot of them, so I wanted them to be financially independent, one day to, hope, be able to have families and whatnot and be able to provide financial support without a tremendous amount of struggle. I did that, but it wasn't necessary for either one of them to consider law school at the age of 30, because by then both of them were well established and on a very, I do want to add that the friends who have children who follow them in the law, and I know, Alexandra, you did not follow your mother in the law, and you have yourself, we're watching you develop your own wonderful career in fashion design, and I'm very, very proud of you, since I've
Thank
known
you.
you since you were, and I must say that I don't think you'll have to consider law school.
I hope not. I'm not 30 yet, but let's see.
So, Alexandra, you're the same age as, you're far from 30, and you have years, but to me, yeah. But the friends of mine who have, and I have friends whose children have actually followed them and are, taking over their practices and whatnot, makes me a little bit. But those parents think guided their children much more sternly into following this path. And it's possible that they weren't as and they were more discouraging of following other ways, I don't know, but the the people whose children become lawyers seem to have a totally different style of parenting.
The reason why I use deterred is because before I even knew what path I wanted to go on, since I was a very little girl, I was so deterred by seeing both of my parents in courts and everything. Everybody would ask me what I wanted to do, and I would say anything but law. That's why I use the word deterred, because I personally was very deterred.
Well, and that might have something to do with it. I mean, clearly my children, I spent a tremendous amount of time away from the children because I was always working. But I think that parents, regardless of your career, I think the difference, it's probably that your mother allowed you to gave you your parents, I should say, not your mother, because you mentioned both parents, but that they did not, when you your reservations, they didn't quell that, they didn't suppress
Right.
it, they allowed you to grow they gave you the room to grow into whatever you were going to be. And that's something that, I think that's a gift. I think your parents gave you a gift, forcing you and shaping you into something that they expected you to be. And I don't know, Andrea, but I think that the kind of parenting that I did was also a little bit of a reaction to the kind of parenting that I was subject to, because my parents had very high expectations, and they were so encouraging, and they were so excited, and they were so proud that I wanted to be a doctor, that when I decided not to go to law school, it was such a huge disappointment to them, and I never wanted to. You know, that may have that may have been an invisible guide pushing me into law, because hey, if you're not going to be a doctor, why not a lawyer? That's good. And so I did not want my children to ever feel those kind of constrictions.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Because for me, my parents, so I wanted to do fashion, and my dad said, no, you're going to law school, because being a fashion designer means that you're a glorified tailor, and we're not gonna have that in our family.
And I'm hearing the same conversation 30 years later, by the way, parentheses.
Yeah, because what Andrea did is she projected what she really loved on.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's interesting, because I think if I had, I used to say when I was much younger that I wish I had the option of becoming a dancer. I love dance. Dance was always my first love. And I don't know that I had the body for it. And certainly I didn't have the training. And God only knows talent. But, dance, theater, it's theatrical,
Yeah.
right? So, there is a little bit of an overlay there. So that's very interesting. And both of our children doing what they're doing, because they're maybe there's some kind of transference here, some kind of subconscious. We actually did push you, but we didn't push you into what we were doing. We pushed you into what we had wished.
Yes, 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 true. At least
Nothing like
we
living.
see them. Yeah, yeah, it's the mirror. And now that we are approaching the end, and because the podcast is called Alive Again, I want to ask you, what activity in your life makes you feel more alive?
Excellent question. So a couple of days ago, I was on the phone with a colleague who is recently retired. And as you know, I've been struggling with the idea that I have to start thinking about retiring. I think I have an ethical obligation to retire, so that I am not, as much as I love the work that I do, and as much as I feel that I have huge amounts of energy on and on, I don't, it's right for my clients. And so at some point I need to start back. And I talked to a friend who recently retired, and she went on and on about how much she loved retirement. I said, so what do you do? She said, oh, she went through a host of things that she's doing now that she's retired. I said, but I do all those. So what will I do when she mentioned that she goes to theater. I probably see much more theater than she does. She mentioned that she reads books. I probably read many more books than she does. I'm always reading 4 or 5 books. I mean, yes, I'm insatiable. I never lost my sort of joie de vivre. I am blessed with enormous amounts of energy, as long as it's directed at fun. Almost everything that I do gives me immense joy, as long as it's not cleaning my house. That gives me huge.
Yes. And
I'm very good at.
yeah, what I love about you is that you know exactly what you want and you put that into practice. And I would love for you to tell our listeners the story when you were offered to be an immigration judge.
Yeah, that happened, and I was encouraged by a colleague who had recently been appointed as an immigration judge, and there was a search going on in the last 2 years. They've increased the number of, so all my colleagues were applying. A mutual friend urged me, and I started to fill out the application. You have to submit application, and then I started to think about what it would mean to become an admission judge, and it dawned on me that I had actually, through my entire adult life, other than during law school when I was teaching, that I really have not been employed by anybody. I have really not had a job. I worked for myself, and I set the parameters, I set the rules. I didn't have to attend meetings because having a meeting with myself seemed pointless. And so all of a sudden, the prospect of becoming a judge meant that I'm at my bench at, let's say 8 o'clock in the morning for sure to start hearing. I would probably have quotas of how many decisions, how many cases I would have to have in the course of a month, and how many I would have to decide. I would have to attend meetings. I would be told when I could take lunch, could have breaks, and I would be under constant vision by the United States to boot. But I would have to be completely accountable, and I would be under somebody's control. And that seemed like a terrible, terrible prospect, and one that would be so it would have a complete effect on who I am. So I would have to change my whole personality to become the person who could do that job. And as much as judge is, impressive, and that would certainly be a huge mark of success, which brings us back at the beginning of this interview. And an easy mark, oh yes, she's a judge. Says that success was absolutely not worth the cost for me. And I tossed that application in the garbage basket, and I gave that up. And I also gave up money because at the federal level would also allow me to retire with a set pension, a federal pension that was very attractive. And other people at this point in their life have made that choice just to guarantee themselves income. But again, I did not let who I wanted, who I am as a person. It wasn't worth to me when I made the calculation. It's not worth.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Yes. Thank you so much. I mean, what a wonderful way to start the year. With so much wisdom from you. It's beyond words.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, it's true. You're so true to who you are that so many people would love to be under your wing and for you to be their
maybe I should
mentor.
talk to the people who are under my wing. I'm not sure. Andrea, on that note, I want to add another anecdote. So as a very young child, probably maybe when I was maybe 6 years old, and terribly romantic because I was already reading books and watching movies, and I had a head fee. I created this little analogy or image, which I then years had my life. And this also brings us back to your question about success. So what I used to say then and continue to say over the years, but I had completely forgotten it now. Let me start again. So that I saw my life as walking along a path that had flowers, and that life was that the analogy of life was that you were walking a path or many paths, but there were flowers along the way, and that it was important that you see the flowers so that you could be looking, and that you pick the flowers as you go along, that you keep collecting these flowers so that at the end of your life, you will have created this huge bouquet of flowers. And that instead of waiting for someone to hand you a bouquet of flowers at the end of your life, because, as you know, in the European tradition, you give somebody who's successful, you award them a bouquet of flowers. That's always a sign of success. So instead of waiting for somebody to award you a bouquet of flowers, you can award yourself this bouquet that you've collected for life. And I must have 15 or that, now that I think of it, that's a pretty wise thing, right?
Yeah.
To view your life through.
Yes, that is incredible. Why don't you write a book about your life and start with that? How many flowers do you have in that bouquet by now? I'm sure a lot of them. Because that, yes, I mean, that's awareness. To live an entire life being aware of the flowers along the journey. And I'm saying that from a point of view of a person who did not see the flowers at the beginning, at the start of my journey.
Think so. I think you're wrong, Andrea. I think you're just not looking at flowers. I think that I think that what you have done and the way you have picked us up, and first of all, I think that what you did to begin with, from the time that you got here, struggle to take care of Alexandra, and I watched you how hard you worked as a mother, and your struggles and your decisions that you had to the way to survive in New York City, and then becoming a lawyer, and your the good work that you're what you did fall and reinventing yourself, and how you came out of this horrific traumatic experience that you had, which, as you know, because I know you so well, still, I continue to say that, and I know you take full responsibility for what happened, but I still think you were a victim of circumstances, and like, really sort of the totality of to you. But at the end of all that, and at the end of your time and your separation for Alexandra, which, as you know, I was like crazy, that you came out and you're doing this, and you wrote this wonderful book, and you're doing this wonderful program, and you're dedicating yourself, so selflessly, you know, to really to genuinely helping people. I think you've built an amazing bouquet, and I think you're doing amazing things. Extremely proud of you, and I really
Thank you so much. It means a lot. It means a lot. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much for being here with us, and thank you for opening the year with on an amazing note of wisdom and hope and all the good things that life has to offer. And we're growing the bouquet of flowers together.
yes, we are. Thank you. It's
All
great
right.
talking to both of you.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you, our listeners. If you enjoyed today's conversation, subscribe, please, and follow us to hear more real life stories of attorneys and other professionals and how their decisions shaped their journeys. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.